Thank you, Frank. We gave him a lot of big words to cover, starting with NOAA, and you did a great job. We definitely make long, complicated acronyms. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. This is the first time that NOAA has been part of SENEDIA, and it's been an incredibly valuable experience already with a lot of conversations that I'll cover throughout my remarks. It does really highlight what the intersection of SENEDIA is, the intersection between military, industry, academia, and science. And throughout my career, as I reflect back, I think there used to be real or perceived a firewall between military and science, and that firewall is gone if there ever was one. I think we've seen that through a lot of the remarks today and last night, that the data NOAA collects, the environmental intelligence, is absolutely critical to our national security, those decisions now and as we move into the future as our world changes. What we do at NOAA, and I'm going to cover some of it, we're going to do a kind of a flyby of it, probably a 30,000-foot flyby of NOAA, because this could go on for days if I talked about everything we do. But it affects every single one of you every day. So as you traveled here, if you traveled on aviation, that was us. Our meteorologists are informing air traffic control, and that's how they're sequencing their flight of arrivals based on the weather. When you looked at going out to dinner last night, if you needed an umbrella, that was us giving you that forecast. Whatever you ate last night, seafood, that was us, but even anything is related to agriculture. We're providing all of those forecasts to figure out when to plant. I come from Illinois, a family of farmers, so when to plant, when to harvest, when to water, when to fertilize, and then seafood, we're informing all of those recreational and commercial forecasts. So every day in your professional and personal lives, you're using our data. Let's see. No, not that one. Yes, no? Okay, there we go. Maybe I'll have you guys click it. Thank you. So my position, I'm the Deputy Undersecretary of Operations. I'm on week 2, so I will take questions. I might not know them all, but essentially my job is the COO, the Chief Operating Officer for NOAA. We sit under the Department of Commerce, so someone that's near and dear to this region, Secretary Gina Raimondo, is my second level supervisor, so definitely learned a lot about this region through her tenure. My position is a senior civilian in NOAA in the agency, and this is the second time that a uniformed officer has held the position. It's typically been a civil servant within the government. That brings a lot of opportunities that have come to bear through a forum like this, that my background is in uniformed service. I have served at Indo-PACOM and had those ties to the sector in this room throughout my career, so that's brought some new opportunities and some new viewpoints to the position as the senior civilian and the daily Chief Operating Officer. NOAA is composed of 6 line offices. So NOAA is the weather service. You're probably familiar with that. We're fisheries. We're satellites, so we launch, operate satellites. We're in charge of all the air traffic and garbage in space now, which there's a lot of. National Ocean Service, so that manages all of the sanctuaries, provides your sea level rise data, your flooding forecasts for municipalities and citizens. Oceanic and atmospheric research, so that's with the rest of our line offices pushing innovation, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the one that I came from most recently, the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, that's NOAA's fleet of ships, aircraft, and now largely uncrewed systems. We're about 25,000 people in NOAA, so about half federal employees, half contractors, and within that is the NOAA Commission Corps, which I'm a part of. So we are one of the 8 uniformed services. We're fairly small. We're at about 350, growing to 500, but we serve throughout the department, throughout NOAA. We also have officers within some of the COCOMs, so NORTHCOM, Indo-PACOM. We're also situated with the Coast Guard, the Navy, and many other places. So we are small but highly integrated across academia and government. Let's see. We'll go to the next slide. I'll have you guys switch it. Okay, so we use many tools to collect our data, and I'm going to start with our ships and aircraft because that informs a lot of the national security data. NOAA's, in addition to ships and planes, we operate a fleet of satellites, radars, uncrewed systems, and these provide everything from weather forecast, climate models, the flooding forecast I mentioned, and hydrographic services. So we are in charge of collecting all the hydrographic data for the U.S. that provides nautical charts for military commercial sector, which is a huge part of our economy. Over $5 trillion moves by the water, and recreational boating. NOAA's mission is pretty simple. It's science, stewardship, and service. So our job is to understand and predict the changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coast, share that knowledge and information with others, and conserve and manage coastal and marine ecosystems. And the economic value is immense. As I mentioned, over $5 trillion moves by the water alone, and that feeds directly into railroad systems. We enable the air commerce, as I mentioned, both civilian and trade. By informing forecasts, we map the fields into the airports so that they can have safe navigations. And food security through seafood and agriculture and tourism. I'm going to throw a couple statistics out just to give people a reference of what this data means to national security and our national commerce. As we do the hurricane forecast, and the aircraft that you see in your upper right-hand side is one of our P3 aircraft. It flies into hurricanes, which is an awesome job. It's really fun if you ever get a chance to do it. But we provide this data from inside the hurricane, as well as flying around it in a high-altitude jet, directly to the Weather Service, and they provide the forecast that you use, whether it's a hurricane. We also fly winter storms. For Hurricane Laura, a hurricane that was in the Gulf of Mexico, evacuation is really important, accurate evacuation. And the value of providing that forecast alone was $600 million in saved evacuations. That doesn't include oil, refinery, oil collection, military installations used to decide when you evacuate, which is a big and costly decision. In this case, that hurricane was pinpointed to the exact hour of landfall within 0.3 miles, 3 days out. So that storm was still over Cuba when we said this is what you need to know. And again, that's what the military fleet is using to make installation movements. That's what bases are using to decide if they evacuate. I know that well from being at MacDill and evacuating 4 times in 1 month. Go to the next slide. We contribute to the economy in 2 primary ways. So I'm not going to give you a test on this. You don't even need to try to trace all the lines. But the point of it is to talk about how we contribute. So you see many systems here, many observing systems on your left-hand side. There's buoys in there, there's satellite systems, there's ships, there's aircraft, there's river gauges. There are observing systems, both static and mobile, that we operate around the U.S. and around the world that are consistently providing environmental intelligence. These track directly to those different service areas that you can see, and then there's a societal benefit to all of that. There's many benefits that this data has that are not on this graph that you might be aware of too. So acoustic data from a buoy, from a ship, from an uncrewed system can be used to track marine mammals or fisheries. It can also be used for other sources. So there's a lot of applications to the data that we collect. We'll go, let's see, I'll stay on this side. The environmental intelligence that we collect, so through varieties of these observing systems, provide 24/7 data. That looks like 50,000 weather warnings and 1.5 million forecasts in a year. So the volume of this data and the products and services that we put out is very significant. We've heard the importance of the work with allies, both in the comments last night as well as the comments today. And that's a theme that I'd like to touch on, as well as the domestic capabilities that we have. We have a lot of initiatives in soft power. There's a lot of connection opportunity for these alignments. I'll go to the next slide. So this is on our G550. This is a G550 jet that is currently being built and modified and will come online as to replace our G4. We're going to actually get 2 of these, which increases our capacity by 100%. This plane is very valuable to hurricane forecast as well as atmospheric rivers, and I'm going to talk about how this also ties not only to our national security, but to our soft diplomacy initiatives that are underway right now. So this data informs the hurricane forecast. It informs the movement. It also informs winter storms called atmospheric rivers. If you're from the West Coast or even the central U.S., you're very familiar with those. They bring all the water from the Pacific across. They provide the water resources. They also provide a lot of flooding. Through flights that we've done with this aircraft in the day that we provided, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, they've used it to manage the water reservoirs in California, Oregon, and Washington. Through using this data to manage those levees a little more less conservatively, because they knew how much water was going to come and when it was going to come, they saved 50,000 households of water for 1 year. That's from one reservoir alone. Water and food security is a national security issue, and the type of data that we can provide partnering with partners like the Army Corps of Engineers is very important. This is also an important soft diplomacy tool, as are many of ours. So right now we are working through our officer at Indo-PACOM and DORAC funding, which are defense funds, to work in the Indo-Pacific theater and work with allies there who need to understand hurricanes and events like atmospheric rivers in Australia better than they do now. We meet the countries, the allies, where they are. So where they are right now is they're having increasing severity and extremity of the events coming across, especially typhoons. There's 2 marching across the Pacific right now. One just passed south of Hawaii, and a second one's about to. So as that's inundating their coastal communities and their populations, they need to understand these storms in a way they can, in a way that we can. As we provide that data and show them how to do their prediction, not just collection of data from the aircraft, but also to read it and do their forecasts with satellites, they're able to better secure their sovereignty and their natural resources. So this is real time right now that we're working through Indo-PACOM and our partners in those countries and academia to provide this data to them. Other examples, we have a blanket overflight with Cuba. So anytime we need to fly over Cuba, we can. That's a standing overflight. That's not something that the military can get access to or permission for. This is a way that we can access areas and provide data back to the nation and back to our allies. We also are looking in that area at abundance of fisheries. So in the Pacific, many of you probably know, fish is gold. It's like the oil of the Middle East. That's what they care about. That is their food supply for their countries, and that really helps protect their sovereignty if they know what's there. We've been working with our allies in the Indo-Pacific, especially the Philippines, to understand what reclamation has done to their fishery stocks, and so they can better manage them and better protect that sovereign resource that they have in a way that they don't have the capability to do. We recently also provided assistance to the Philippines after the marine vessel Princess Empire oil spill to help them understand the impacts of that. And the U.S. is the primary charting authority for several small island states in the Pacific region. We work with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency to do that work. So as I mentioned, we really meet these countries where they are to help them have the critical information that we need. Let's go to the next slide. And these slides are intended to kind of be background and give you an idea of some of the work that we do. NOAA right now, we're in the midst of a pretty significant recapitalization, the largest that we've ever had in the history of NOAA. So 25% of our fleet is being recapitalized right now. This ship is called the Discover, and it's going to be home ported just down the street at Navstay, and I'll show you a picture of a new facility we're building there. This ship is critically important. This is an exploration ship that helps us discover what the resources are in the U.S. EEZ. Only about 24% of that EEZ is mapped right now, so it's hard to protect what we have when we don't know what's there. So this ship, the Discover, will be very important in continuing that work. Let's go to the next slide. This is a picture of the Naval Station Newport. So this will be, there's pilings going in down the street right now. If you happen to go there, we're going to be close neighbors to Newark. We're looking forward to continue those partnerships with them. We'll have 4 ships home ported here, and those ships will operate around the world. So like much of the military, our ships rarely see their home port. I'll keep on this slide and offer some more thoughts. One thing that's unique about our ships and aircraft is our ability to really drive research to operations. So we partner often with the military, with industry. We've had many discussions with businesses here today, but a lot of times, whether it's through a military program of records or a small business innovation research, SBIR, those platforms are developed especially in the uncrewed sector, and it's hard sometimes to get those in the fleet and test them. We can do it pretty nimbly. We have pretty much in-house shops that involve everything from engineers to flight test pilots that can look at things to engineering that can look at something, decide if it can be flown, what the risk tolerance is, and launch it out. One of those things has been an uncrewed aircraft system that we fly out of our P3. So within hurricanes, there's a need to understand the air-sea interface and what's happening there to drive extreme weather. It's not really a place you want to fly. We've tried that. It didn't go so well. So we typically stay up at a few thousand feet. But we can launch uncrewed systems out of the Sonobui drop tube and study that region, and that's something we've done. Talked to someone in this room who's working on the next generation of that. One of the early technologies we tested was actually a Navy-developed technology that they were having trouble getting through their their internal process to throw it out of their P3. We can do that as a one-stop shop, and we tested that for them and passed it back. I know that one of the uncrewed aircraft systems that's being developed right now, there's an interest in the Marines, so they can also launch it and figure out what's in the surf before they have to launch their assets in there. So there's a lot of connectivity between the groups in this room, whether it's industry developing it, Navy, Marines, other services, outlining the requirements, and then us building onto those requirements and being one that can easily test that and get that out into the field and push that research to operations cycle. I will mention the ships and aircraft recapitalization is a great thing, but we definitely have challenges. Like all of you, we have single points of failure. That showed pretty prominently this year. We have 2 ships that operate in the Arctic, so we're seeing a lot of growth in the Arctic, in the Pacific, a lot of push for our capabilities and our capacity there. Through the 2 ships that we have, they're both 57 years old, which isn't a great age for ships. So one caught on fire. Fortunately, the crew was able to fight that fire at sea. After about a 2-hour firefight, they were hundreds of miles offshore. We were able to get it back to America, Samoa, and are undergoing extensive repairs to bring that ship back online. At the same time, the sister ship, who would have picked up that mapping in the Arctic, had a steering propulsion failure, and there's one person in Canada who makes these parts by hand, so we're waiting months to get that part. We work closely with the Coast Guard to provide this mapping data in the Arctic for national security, and because of those just the old infrastructure and the single point of failure, we're missing the critical time to map the Bering Strait to the Canadian border in support of the Coast Guard mission, as well as St. Matthews Island and North Kodiak. So this data is going directly into national security. We're working as quickly as we can in the preparations to provide to recapitalize the fleet and make sure that we can continue that. We've had tremendous success. So this is an example of Naval Station Newport. We just broke ground on a new pier down in Charleston, South Carolina, that will generously offer space to the Coast Guard, the Navy, anybody that needs it down there to continue that mission. But there are challenges. So how do we address it? This forum, the conversations that I've had here and look forward to having with all of you to figure out how we can work together with the resources we have to drive innovation and have industry help drive that innovation are absolutely critical now more than ever. I appreciate the comments by Secretary Del Toro and others that have recognized NOAA's contribution to our economic and national security. As I mentioned, I've seen a growth in that. This forum is an example of that. We are participating now in the Shipbuilding Council, which brings together the U.S. coalition of shipbuilders and the importance in having the building, the maintenance, the workforce in that forum. The Federal Fleet Board, so we have a seat at that table now. I was recently part of a maritime risk symposium at the Naval Postgraduate School that I think was an important growth from a forum and a discussion that had historically been limited to the Navy and the Marines and the Coast Guard, now included NOAA, but it also included Military Sea Lift Command, and those merchant mariners are an absolutely critical part for our national security. As NOAA is an important bridge from those military sectors to academia. We have academic partners here today. I also serve as a co-chair on the interagency working group that looks at the needs of the Federal Oceanographic Fleet. And the data that a Federal Oceanographic Fleet collects, including the Navy White ships and Navy research ships, is absolutely critical to national security. Unfortunately, that fleet's projected to decline about 37% just by 2040, absent any additional recapitalization, so there are challenges there. Next slide. This is a picture of the Henry Bigelow, so I'm showing this to you because it's down the street right now in port at the Naval Station Newport. It's had a good talk at a break about someone who has been on that. We definitely recognize the need for a more resilient domestic maritime fleet to support our day-to-day operations from shipyards to our at-sea deployments. And like has been talked about a lot in this forum, workforce is one of our critical challenges right now. We've had some really good success as of late with some new authorities from Congress, including increased shore leave, retention, recruitment bonuses. The state and maritime merchant marine academies are absolutely critical, and we've really enhanced the way that we recruit in those places to make sure that we can staff our vessels and deliver on the sector. We're also changing the way that we do things by increasing bandwidth on ships. We're trying to meet the younger generation where they are, providing more rotational crewing. But that workforce that you all talk about, that ready workforce that has the scientific as well as the technical background, is absolutely critical to us as well. Next slide. So I'm going to wrap up with just a couple more slides, and then definitely we'll take some questions. This year, you may have seen NOAA predicted a very high likelihood, 90% chance of above normal Atlantic hurricane season. That's 17 to 24 named storms. The average is 14. 8 to 13 hurricanes. The average is 7. And 4 to 7 major hurricanes. The average is 3. So it's been a relatively quiet or slow start, but I would not let that trick you, because we're definitely coming into the climatological peak of the hurricane season. During the active years, we've seen that there's a doubling of a chance of a tropical system making landfall on the east coast of the U.S. relative to the normal or inactive year. We've seen them coming further north as well as the water warms. One of the things that NOAA does, I mentioned the mapping of the ports. So we do routine mapping in all of the U.S. ports to make sure that we can keep commerce safely flowing, especially as the ships are larger, their drafts are deeper. We have to keep that commerce safely moving in and out. We also pre-position for hurricanes, and we'll come in right behind the storm to survey the port and make sure that we can get it open. When the when the storm comes through, the Coast Guard captain of the port has to close all ships. They either sit on the hook if they're out, or they'll sit in port, and all commerce stops, which is tens of millions of dollars an hour, as well as moving important cargo. So getting in there right behind a storm is important to keep commerce flowing. We also were first on scene after the Baltimore bridge collapse, so I didn't include any pictures of that, but we were first on scene. And as they opened those 2 auxiliary channels, if you remember, that was from the surveying that we did, not only to the bottom, but also to the height of the bridge to determine what would be safe transports to move some traffic in and out as we reestablished the main channel with them. We had tidal experts on site. We had weather service experts on site to provide forecasts that inform the divers when they could go down and try to do some of those reclamation and those search and rescue activities early on. So most of those disasters, either man-made or natural, NOAA is on the scene providing that important guidance. Next slide. I'm going to provide a couple examples just of key partnerships with industry. This is not an ad for SpaceX, I promise you that, but we recently launched our latest satellite, the GOES-19, which provides critical data back to the U.S. for national security, for our weather, for flooding, a variety of sensors that are on that satellite to provide data back. This was a good example of partnership with military, with industry. In this case, it was launched on a Falcon Heavy rocket that actually came back down. The rockets came back down and landed to be reused, which was pretty cool. When I watch this launch, and again, look at this picture, it really reminds me of the importance in industry and driving innovation. We know we can inform what we need to collect from a scientific perspective, but we can't get it done without industry. And that's not the job of the government. That's the job of industry to help push the boundaries of what we can do. Next slide, please. This slide is really another example of kind of the industry, military, academic partnership. So this shows you in the lower left-hand corner, you see flight tracks of the 2 P-3 aircraft, the NOAA 2 P-3 aircraft and the G-4 aircraft. So they're out flying through the hurricane, around the hurricane, dropping sensors that were made by industry, launching uncrewed systems out of the plane that were made by industry, operating instruments, including tail Doppler radars. There's 3 airborne tail Doppler radars in the world. They're all on NOAA aircraft. We're out flying that. The uncrewed systems, which have been in development about the last 10 years, we improved the generations of those developed by industry, early on were driven by programs of the Navy and have value to the military at large. In the water are about 15 Navy gliders, so through our partnership with the Navy, we launched the gliders, they operate them, that data is all being ingested into hurricane forecast. There's a variety of buoys out there collecting data, which are made by industry. So a really important example of how we all work together to provide critical information for our commerce, but also for our national security. I'm going to offer a couple challenges at the end here before I open it up for questions, and they're largely regionally based. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we provide environmental intelligence that affects every person in this room every day, both for your personal and your professional life. We're nimble. We can test systems very nimbly. So if there's a system that's being developed and there's a place for it to be tested and there's an application to know it's something we can look at deploying off of our ships, our aircraft, or our uncrewed systems. We're a bridge between military, academia, and industry, but we're also a bridge to other nations. One really interesting example of this that I learned just 2 days ago, yesterday, we were visiting our Narragansett Fisheries Lab. They're showing me some fishery samples, some samples they just collected on one of our ships, and they're getting ready to ship to Poland. So Poland is where they actually process these fishery samples. And I said, why in the world do you go to Poland? And they said, well, the State Department was advocating for partnerships during the Cold War. At the time, Poland was still in Russia. We found this was a partnership that we could have. We started sending the samples there to test, and it continues to this day. So there's really interesting places from a science perspective that we can be a bridge, because nations care about their food security. They care about their weather, right? And that's information that we can provide either to them or in partnership with them, maybe providing some force for allies in national security that can be thought about a little bit more. So I challenge this room to figure out how we can continue to partner together, both as military partners, as industry, as academia, to drive some new innovation, drive some new partnerships. I've had conversations about it in this room already. Specific to this region, as the wind farms go up, and if anyone's looked offshore, you've seen all of them. When the wind farms go up, we can't do the fisheries surveys the way that we traditionally have. Anytime you don't collect data for a fisheries survey, you have to make it more conservative. And that's not necessarily because you're protecting the fishery at that sustainable level, but any level of uncertainty requires a more conservative fishery quota. More conservative quota affects the fishermen in your community, but if you keep pulling that thread, it affects the restaurant, it affects the dock workers, it affects the factories, and ultimately, if we have less seafood, because there's a lack in the survey data, we're going to be more reliant on exports for that food security. So one challenge to you is, how can we make those wind farms part of our ecosystem and develop acoustic sensors, either that move on uncrewed systems, which is something we're working on right now with partners in this room, or even to mount those active acoustic sensors on the wind farm legs so that we can fill those voids in the fishery forecasts that have opened up. Another challenge ahead of us that I'll offer to this room to see if there's ideas either now or follow up on innovation is our radar service. So across the U.S., there's radars that are in place that are informative to the daily weather forecast. Those radars need to be recapitalized by 2030. We're looking at phased array radar right now, but I would lean on anyone in this room with knowledge on other systems, other phased array radar systems that are in development that could possibly be partnered or applied to the weather forecast needs. So those are a couple ideas for this room, especially specific to this region. I'm going to close there, and I'll take any questions there. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the attention being here. And you can ask any questions you want. My colleague John Moore is here, so between the two of us, hopefully we can get you an answer.